Hello and welcome everybody, this is Roland Hartmann from GravicalMotion.com and I'm back with another Stardust tutorial. If you're not familiar with Stardust, Stardust is a modular particle plugin for Adobe After Effects, and if you do not have it yet, then I would recommend that you jump over to their website, which is www.superluminal.tv, and there you can get Stardust, and you also can get a free trial version to follow along our tutorial. So let's take a look what we are going to create today. In this tutorial we will create this build-up animation. You see that it is quite complex and a lot is going on, and we will focus on the ability of Stardust to trace text layers. So we will create this nice build-up of our text here. Yeah, this is what we're going to do. So let's jump right into After Effects and let's start this tutorial. In After Effects, we first of all have to create a new composition. So let's go to Composition and create New Composition. In my case, I will use the hdtv 25 preset. I will make sure that the duration is set to 15 seconds. And I want to rename this comp to my main composition. Inside my main composition, I want to create a text now, so I will press Ctrl T to select my text tool and click inside my composition to create a text layer, and then I will enter Stardust. And let's make this a little bit bigger. You can use, of course, any font that you like and any text that you like. Let me take a look here. Let's say 225 size is good. And now I want to align it using my Align panel here. If you do not find this, you can come up here to Window and then activate the Align panel. Okay, so this will be our source layer, which we will use to trace and to create our particles. So let's go back to our selection tool and let's create a new layer. And this layer will be our Stardust layer. So we'll create a new solid and call this Stardust. The color is not really important, so I just make it white and click OK. Now with the Stardust layer selected, I move to my Effects and Presets panel right here and type in Stardust and apply it to my Stardust layer. And you see immediately we have some particles emitting. Let's hide our text layer for now. And let's select our Stardust layer. Now let's select the first emitter, and to rename it we just click Enter, and I want to name this the Lines Emitter. So this will be the emitter that will create outlines for our text. Now let's change some parameters here. First of all, I do not want this to emit from a point, I want this to emit from a text or a mask. Now let's specify the emitting layers. We have to scroll down a bit and you see we have the layer properties right here, and I can choose, instead of the none, I will choose my Stardust layer. So the second one is my text layer here. And you see immediately the particles change. Now they are emitted from my text layer. Under path properties, we want to change the text mask emit type. If it's set to volume, then your particles will emit from the volume or from the surface of our text, but we want this to emit from the edge. So let's change this to edge and let's take the speed down to 0. And now you see already that the particles are forming around the edge of our title. So to make this look really cool, we have to change a few things here. First of all, I want these particles to move around my edge. You see, if I create a quick round preview, now they are just popping up and then disappearing again. But I want them to move along the outline of my title. So let's go to the path properties, and you see we have this speed along path and the speed randomness. And I want to type in here like a value of 15 for the path speed and a value of 5 for the randomness. And if we take a look now, you see now they are moving along the outlines of our title. Okay, now let's move on to the next node that is already visible here, and that's called Particle, and I will rename this and we'll call it my Lines Particles. Now let's take a look at these. I want these to be circles, and I want these to live 2 seconds long, so this is Good, but I want them to be a little bit smaller, so I will open up the particle properties and we'll change the size here from 10 to, let's say, 3 for now. You see that they are quite small now, but actually what we are going to do later on is we will zoom in with the camera move, and then they will be, of course, closer to the camera. So I think that the size is okay for now. So let's add a bit of color to these particles. And to add color inside the particle properties, you see we have this option and it's called particle color. Right now it's set to a solid color and it is white. But I can also choose random from gradient. And if I open up the color gradient option here, you see that I can now specify a gradient. You can specify the gradient yourself by adding points here and adding colors and create your own gradient that way. Or you can also use a preset. And in my case, I want to use a preset because there's a really cool one, or many cool ones, but this one is especially nice, I think. So let's select this one and click apply. And you see that now Stardust will colorize all these particles randomly with the color from this gradient. Okay, so far so good. Now we have small particles that are traveling around the path of our text, but we cannot really see the text. So what I want to do is I want the particles to create some kind of strokes or small trails. And therefore we can use a system that's called the auxiliary system. So if you click at this little icon here that looks like a firecracker explosion or whatever, then you get this auxiliary node. And now let's link this up here. And you see, by adding the auxiliary node itself, nothing changes because we also have to add a new particle node. So let's click this circle here to add a new particle node. And then link this up too, because of course our auxiliary system is kind of an emitter and it also needs a particle node to emit. Now let's come in here and change the names here so that everything stays organized. And I will just select my auxiliary here and press enter, and then I will type my lines auxiliary. And these particles are my lines aux particles. In the auxiliary system, we will change the speed from 100 to 0. Now you see that they stay along the path of our title. And now we will move on to my lines auxiliary particles and make this look a little bit nicer. So let's change the lifespan to 1.5 seconds, because 2 seconds is a little bit too long in this case. Then go to the particle properties and set the size down to 1. Now we have these really nice looking thin lines here. And another thing I want to do, I want to add a size over life. And you can do this by opening up this over life setting. And here you see I can open up this size. And then I have this graph here and I can specify this. You can also use presets here. So if we take a look here at these presets, actually what I want this fade out Bezier stuff. And I can load this up by selecting it and hit apply. And then I can change it a bit because I want it to be a little bit longer, like so. Okay, and now you see that in the end here, these trails that the auxiliary system is building are getting thinner. And this is exactly what I want. So if you create a quick run preview, you see that we have a really nice build-up animation now. The small particles are tracing the outline of our title. So this is the first part of our animation. Now let's make this a little bit more interesting, and therefore we want to duplicate the whole node tree here. And I can do this by simply clicking and dragging a rectangle around all the nodes and then pressing Ctrl D on my keyboard to create a duplicate. Now all the nodes and also the hierarchy between them is copied. Now let's choose or select the first emitter here and let's rename it so that we do not get confused. And this will be my digits emitter. I want to create some digits particles now. So let's rename these particles to digits particles. Let's name this one here to digits auxiliary or digits aux. And these particles I want to name digits aux particles. Okay. To emit digits, first of all, I have to create a texture for my particles, and therefore I have to create a new composition. So let's go to composition and let's create a new composition, and I will call this the digits. And I will make this very small, so about 100 times 100. And I also will reduce the length to about 8 frames. The length of this composition determines how many different particles you can add. Let me show you this to make this a little bit clearer. In my case, I want to use a simple text to create the digits. So I will just create a new text layer by choosing my text tool and clicking into my comp. And now I will choose a font that I downloaded that's called Digital 7. You can get this from thefont.com. You can of course use whatever font you want, but this is pretty cool to create the digits. Now let's type in a 1 here and let's make this way smaller. So maybe like, let's see, maybe 110 around, and let's align it so that it more or less fills the whole composition. And now let's shrink the length of this layer to 1 frame. Let's create a duplicate by selecting the layer and pressing Ctrl D on the keyboard, and now move it over to frame number 2. Double click the layer and put in a 0. Now we have a 1 and a 0, and if you want to use or if you want to create binary code particles, this is all you need. In this case, you could just change the composition length in the composition settings to 2 frames. And then you can create a binary code. So let's take a look at that. Let's go back to our main composition. Let's just for now close the Stardust layer. Now let's drag our digits composition into our main composition and make it invisible. Select the Stardust layer and then move to our digits aux particles, the last node here. Because actually I want these particles to emit these digits. Now let's change the particle shape from circle to texture. And let's specify a texture here. And you see we have no texture selected yet, so we have to specify a layer, and this will be our digits layer, and I also want to specify it for the dark side, and I want the sample time to be random still frame. Now we cannot really see anything because they are very small and they are also overlapping with our lines. So let's deactivate our lines for now. I select all the nodes here, and then I just go to one of the selected layers and turn off this FX symbol, and then I can only see the digits particles. So let's select this digits aux again here, and let's change a few settings here. First of all, make sure that use texture ratio is activated, and then change the size to 4. Now our digits are a little bit more visible, but we have to change a few more settings so that this looks nice. So first of all, I want to change the auxiliary system. So let's come up here, and I see that I made a mistake here. Let me correct this quickly. Okay. And in my auxiliary system, I want to animate the particles per second value. So in the beginning, I want this to start out with a low value of particles. So let's set this to 5 particles per second, and let's create a keyframe on frame 0. Now let's move up for 4 seconds. And let's change this to, let's say, 60 particles per second. And then this will create some kind of a nice build-up. And I also want to change the digits particles. So let's move to the digits particles, and instead of a circle, I want this to be a rectangle, because I want to kind of build a cursor that is more or less like writing these digits. So let's choose rectangle. Let's change the life to 7 seconds. I want these to live for a while. And now let's change the size of this rectangle to 3 on the X and 3 on the Y. Now I have these small things here, and you see now everything is pretty small and pretty fine, but you will see this in a moment when I create a camera, and I will create a camera actually right now that we can see what is going on. So let me do this quickly. Let me set up a quick camera system here. First of all, let's go to layer and create a new camera. And I want this camera to be kind of a little bit of a wide angle, so 24 should be okay. Now let's create a new null object, and let's turn this into a 3D layer and parent my camera to my null object. And this will be our cam control layer where we can control the rotation of the camera. Now I will move to around 8 seconds and I will set a keyframe on the position for my camera. So I choose the camera, press P to reveal the position and set a keyframe at 8 seconds. And I will apply a keyframe to the rotation. So let's select the cam control layer, press R and set a keyframe to the Y rotation at 8 seconds. Now let's move to, I don't know, about 2 seconds. And just for now, I will zoom in here quite a bit. So change the X value, something like -250. And now let's add a bit of rotation here, like 60 degrees. And now we can see what's going on here. Actually, what we can do is we can select these two keyframes and move them to frame number 0. We will later on create a nice animation here. For now, this is just that we have the option to simply move in and out a bit and take a look how all this is looking. Okay, back to our digits particles. You see that we have this nice 0 and 1 code now. But initially my idea was to create more complex systems. So let's go back to my digits composition and let's go to composition settings again and then change again the duration from 2 to 8. Now I zoom out here to make this visible and I will add a few more digits. So let's duplicate the last one here, move it up to the next frame, double click and let's put in some symbols. So maybe this one here, make it a bit bigger, that it fills out our composition a bit better and align it again. Now again, Ctrl D to duplicate, move up one frame, double click and let's create maybe a parentheses. This is a little bit too big. So with this selected, make it smaller and align it. Ctrl D, let's create another symbol, maybe something like this one here, looks quite good. Ctrl D to create a duplicate, move it one frame, double click to change the text to something like maybe this symbol here, looks also quite cool. Ctrl D, one more, maybe something like that, Ctrl D, and the last one. And now I will just use a plus symbol and make this a little bit bigger again. And align it. Okay. If we move to our main composition now, you will see that now these particles update and now we have a more complex looking setup with all these different particles. But you also see that our particles are only white and I do not want this. I want these to take over the color from my initial particle. So let's select our digits auxiliary particles and inside these settings we move to texture. And you see that the texture color use is now set to default, and default means that it uses the original color of the texture. So if you go to your digits composition and for example change the color of this one here to, I don't know, something, and you go back now to your main composition and you see now that the color of the number symbol changed. So let's go back here and undo this for now because I do not want this. And let's go to the main composition again and the digits auxiliary particle settings. I want to change this default setting to lightness or to alpha. So if I select alpha here, then let's take a look and you see now these particles actually take over the color from my digits particles. And this is exactly what I want. Okay, so let's move on and let's change a few more settings to create a really nice build-up animation. And therefore we have to go back to our digits emitter and change a few parameters here. So first of all, I want to animate the particles per second. In the beginning, I do not want to start with 100 particles per second because this is a little bit too much. So let's create a keyframe on frame 0 and let's type in here 20 particles per second. Now let's move to exactly 7 seconds in our timeline and change this value to 100 particles. I also want to change the size of this emitter. So in the beginning it should be bigger to create more 3D effects. So let's type in 500 here and let's create a keyframe on frame 0. And let's move up to 5 seconds now. Around 5 seconds, and let's set the size here to 150. Now we have another keyframe here, and you see now in the beginning that this is a little bit far apart, and then it will create more of a nice build-up. Another thing that we have to do now, because we changed the size of our emitters, we have to change the origin in C. So in the beginning, I want this to be set to exactly the middle of my emitter. So I will set it to -250 and set a keyframe here. And I will move forward to my next keyframe by pressing K on my keyboard. And then I will change this size to 75, or -75, I should say, which is exactly the half of my size here. And this will just make sure that this stays really in the middle of our composition throughout the whole animation. Okay, now let's create a quick run preview. So let's activate our first tree here again by selecting it and clicking FX on one of the selected layers here, or effects here. Let's create a quick run preview and let's see what we have. And you see right now these lines, the circle particles and the lines, are starting right from the beginning, which I actually do not want. I want them to start a little bit later to create a nice build-up. So let's change this quickly. Therefore I go to my main emitter, the lines emitter here, and I will set a keyframe at exactly 4 seconds. So at exactly 4 seconds, I want to apply a keyframe with the value of 100 particles per second. Now I move forward or backwards 1 frame, and then I will set this to 0. So this will just say start emitting at 4 seconds, and before this 4 seconds do nothing. And you see now our points here and the lines will start emitting right here, and this will create a better build-up animation. Okay, so far so good. Now let's take a look here at my build-up, and I think that in the beginning my particles are a little bit too much. So what I want to do is I want to come into my auxiliary system here, and I already applied a keyframe here, and I want to change this a bit. So let's select it, the particles per second here in the digits aux, and then activate our graph editor. And with the graph editor selected, I can now change this curve a bit. So I will select my first keyframe here and apply a easy ease out here. And then let's say we want to apply an easy ease in here. Now let's scale this up a bit and make this curve here a little bit smoother. So just that in the beginning, you know, we do not have so many particles, and that over time the density of these particles will increase and will form the shape of our text. Okay, I think this is better. Or if it's really too much, then you can come into your auxiliary system, and inside the auxiliary system you have these auxiliary settings, and you can say, so the emit chance is too much, so we can just set this to 50%, and then we get this more randomly looking emission. And you see that this looks also quite cool. Let's take a look how this looks in the end. Let's turn off our graph editor, we do not need this anymore. So let's take a look here when everything is revealed, how this looks. And I think actually, yeah, it looks really good. So maybe we will use this setting. It looks even more like code. Now, to make this really look cool and complex, we need to duplicate this tree here once again. So let's select it by clicking and dragging a rectangle around it, and let's press Ctrl D to create another duplicate. I will select the new ones here, move them over here. And now we'll change the names quickly so that we still know what we are doing, because this gets really confusing with all these different emitters. And I will call this corner emitter. Now we'll create some nice corners. Now I will change the particle names here. I will call these corner particles. I want to call this here corner auxiliary. And the last one will be our corner aux particles. And now let's change a few settings here. So first of all, what we need to do here is we need to change the emission in the corner emitter settings. I do not want this to emit so many particles. Let's just deactivate all the other trees for now. So let's select all of these nodes here, and let's turn off these effects for now so that we only have this tree active. Now let's select our corner emitter and let's change the particles per second here. In the beginning, I want this to start out with a value of 35 particles. So we will set 35 particles right here. And I want it to stop at around 5 seconds. So let's move this keyframe that I just created to 5 seconds or to 4 seconds. Right here, 1 frame before seconds. And then we can bring in the second particle or the second keyframe that we have here. And this is set to a value of 100. So let's change this to 0 so that we have 35 and then at exactly 5 seconds these stop emitting. And now you see that they will just disappear over time. And this is exactly what I want. The next change is to deactivate the animation that's applied to the size here. So that's deactivated by just clicking on this stopwatch here. Now let's type in 1000 to make this even bigger. Let's also deactivate the animation on the origin C here and let's set it to -500. You see what this does? This creates a really big structure here through space, 3D space, distributed in 3D space, and this is exactly what I want. Now let's go to the corner particles and change a few settings here. Let's turn this live down a bit to about 6 seconds. Now they will just disappear a little bit earlier. Okay. Now let's go to our corner auxiliary system. And let's change these values as well. So in the beginning here, we have 5 particles per second, right here and also right here. And actually I'm not in the right one. So let's move down here so that I'm in the right corner aux right here. And in the end here at 4 seconds, I have 60 particles per second, which is a little bit too much here. So let's turn this down to maybe 45, maybe even just 35. Don't know yet. I will put in 35 at exactly 4 seconds. And now we will move to our corner auxiliary particles and change a few settings here as well. So first of all, we will turn these down a bit. They have to be a bit smaller. So let's turn this down to 3. Then I want to change the opacity here a bit. So let's change the particle opacity from 100 to 75 and apply a random opacity here of 50. Okay. What I also want to do is I want to change the transfer mode of these particles to screen instead of normal. And this will have an effect if many particles are visible in a moment. And now what we want to do is we want to apply a new node here, and this will be a replica node. So let's click on this little symbol here. This will create a replica node. And let's connect this to our aux particles. With this replica node selected, I could now create duplicates or replicates, and I can offset them. In my case, I do not want to create a simple offset. I want to create corners. So let's select corners here. And now let's change the number of replicates to 10. And let's change the density to about 200 for now. And you see right now it just creates more particles and overlapping particles. But if we change the offset, then you will immediately see what's happening. So let's set this to 6. And then we will get something that's looking like this. And this looks pretty cool. Now we have this really complex 3D grid setup. Which is also kind of forming our title. Another thing to make this more interesting is that we offset the texture. You see that now it's replicating exactly the same symbols. It's nice if you want it, but in my case I want it to look really random like code. So I will change the offset texture here from none to random, and you will immediately see now it looks even more complex and even more nice. Now let's move down here to our corner properties and let's change the max corners here from 20 to 10, and this will just reduce the complexity of this a little bit. So I prefer this look here. And another thing that we want to do is we want to give this a little bit of an angle. So I can change the angle here in X to 45 degrees and you will see what this does. This just rotates them a bit and also adds a little bit of randomness and just a little bit of another texture. And actually this is all about texturing, you know. These particles will just add a complex texture to our system here, and I think that this looks really nice. Sorry if you hear some strange noise here in the background. My cat is pretty bored and annoyed that I'm sitting here talking to my computer and not to her. So sorry for that. I hope that she will be tired in a few minutes. So let's continue now. Another setting that I want to change here is I want to change So another setting that I want to change, I want to trim the replicates over time a little bit. So let's select the replica again. And there is also this option to animate the properties here. And you see, we can trim the replicates over life. And this is exactly what I want to do. So I want these just to get shorter in the end of their lives. So let's create a new point here by just clicking on this line. And then just let's drag this one here down to 0. So this is approximately what I want. And now if we take a look that in the end here, these will trim, so they will become smaller. You see quite good right here. And then they disappear. And this is exactly what I want to achieve. Okay, so now this is more or less finished. So what we can do now is we can activate all of these node trees here again. Let's come in here and activate them. Let's take a look what we have got, and you see that we have a really nice and complex looking system here. And another thing that you can do, you can blend these a little bit together. You see, I set the particles here, the replica particles, to screen, so this creates a nice blending, but I didn't change the mode, the blend mode of the other particles. So let's do that quickly. And actually I want to change these particles here, the digits particles, to add, and I want to change digits auxiliary particles to screen. And I also want to change these particles here to screen, and these one here as well. And this will just create a little bit more of blending in between the particles. Another thing that we can do to improve the build-up here is we can scale our replica system. You see that in the end here it's pretty offset, and this is because of the size in C. I mean, it's 1000 pixels wide in C space, and this looks really cool if we are inside here. But if we move out here and then the whole thing gets visible, it would be cool if this just shrinks down like it is building up our structure. So let's add one more node here to this system, and this will be the transform node. So let's click this little plus icon here, add a transform node and link it to our replica node here. Now with this transform mode, let's move to 4 seconds and select it. And you see we have the option here to scale it on the Z-axis. So let's activate this and create a keyframe at exactly 4 seconds. So 100 with a value of 100. Now let's move to 7 seconds. And you see that now everything is more or less visible. And let's scale this to a size of 30%. And you see now it shrinks it down so that it stays, it's nearer to our original shape, which looks pretty cool. Okay, so let's create a quick run preview to see what we've got so far. Okay, the preview is finished, so let's take a look what we've got. And you see we have a pretty nice build-up animation, very complex looking, and the render time still is really great. You know, we have millions of particles here probably, but it's still working really smooth, and Stardust is really great to create this really complex looking particle systems. And if you're interested how I created the background and everything, I will not go through this now step by step. I will really rush through it quickly because the tutorial is already very long. So quickly I will show you how to do this, quickly set up a background. It's pretty easy because actually I used a preset. So let's create a new solid and let's call it background grid. Apply Stardust to this layer. And now let's move it here, and I will deactivate this layer for now. And now I will go to the presets by clicking on these symbols here to open up my preset browser. And then you have these backgrounds here, and here you have this corners backgrounds, which is pretty cool. Now I can replace my system right here. And now you see we will get this nice background. Now I changed the emitter so that it is a little bit bigger, 2500 times 1500 times 2500. Now I can change the replica here a little bit, so change the maximum corners to 10, change the randomness to 2 or 3. Now turn down the replicates to about 15 or even less, let's say 5. Offset something like, I don't know, 40 or whatever, to create such great, it's not exactly the same that I had, but you can play around with this. I just want to show you very quickly how to add this in the background. And now you see that you have this really complex setting. And if you change the particle colors here now inside the particle settings to the same gradient, so let's choose this gradient here, apply it. Let's do the same right here. You see that immediately we get a really cool look. So preset, okay, apply. Now I could just maybe even turn down the opacity a little bit of this. So opacity 75. And now we created a really nice background and a really complex setup. Of course, then you can add a colored background or some textures. You can add a glow layer and whatever, improve the camera animation to make it more smooth. But this is totally up to you, so spend more time, improve this. This is just the start, what you can do with this plugin. I really showed you only a bit what is possible. So take it on from here, create awesomeness. I hope that you enjoyed the tutorial, that you learned something. I thank you very much for watching, and I really hope to see you soon. Goodbye.